time. Well, I'm gonna.
Okay, let's go. Good, these things hurt my ears.
All right, I think we are live. I'm just gonna wait and see if we get any thumbs up. Let me know that folks can hear us. And hopefully we are streaming and my Wi-Fi is working. I see a thumbs up. That's always a good sign. Wait for a couple more. And there are a couple more, and there is a heart. So I am going to get started. Good morning, everybody. We are once again here at the Buttonwood Park Zoo, bringing to you another one of our virtual keeper chats. It's kind of a gray day outside, so we are inside, actually our wildlife education center. And so these guys that you're seeing right now are in a tank that we're going to be talking about today. Once again, we are with Kyle, our favorite aquarist. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, guys.
And he's going to be talking to you about this tank. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And again, if you have questions, just shout them out. Looking for some more thumbs up to make sure that everybody's seeing this. If there's folks that could comment on the quality and let me know if this is streaming okay, that would be great. All right, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. So, all right, Kyle, take it away.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you again for joining us here for our virtual keeper chats at the Buttonwood Park Zoo. So, if you guys haven't guessed, this is our clownfish and anemone tank. So, right in front of you guys, first of all, on the fish, you're seeing two-banded clownfish. So, this is a different species than the typical Finding Nemo type fish that everybody sees and talks about all the time. And the two that are in front of you guys are actually a bonded pair, which means that the larger one, down at the bottom, that is our female. And the bigger one is the male. And these guys will bond and pair up, and they will lay eggs in this tank from time to time. So one of the cool things about clownfish are that they obviously host with the anemones. So you guys are probably wondering, what does host mean, things like that. It means that they have a good relationship with the anemones, and they are able to live inside them and live amongst them without being stung, which is a very, very good adaptation for these guys in the ocean. As you can see right there, he's brushing up right against those tentacles that would normally sting and eat another fish. But these guys can go right up in certain species of anemones, not all of them, and not get stung at all. They're able to do this because these guys will actually do a dance, for lack of a better term, and they build up a slime-resistant coat on their bodies, which allows them to not get stung by the anemones. So if you see them brushing up against them, like that guy did just right there, he's maintaining that slime coat so he doesn't get stung. So like I said, we only have the one species of clownfish in here, and these guys are called two-banded clownfish. We do have some other animals in the tank as well, like this big guy right here. This is actually a carpet anemone. Now, you guys may be thinking anemones are plants and things like that, but they are actually animals just like coral. So, I mean, if you put my hand for a size comparison, you can see that's a really, really big anemone right there, and that guy's called a carpet anemone. And he pretty much takes the bottom of the tank, but then he shares all this upper rock work with all of our bubbletip anemones, which is another species of anemone that is pretty common in the Indo-Pacific region. So once again, we're talking about Australia, Great Barrier Reef, down into Indonesia, up into India, China, areas like that. So these guys are very, very common. They like to sit on the rockwork and sit where there's nice flow and where there's a lot of good light. What you're zoomed in right now is actually porcelain anemone crabs. So those are a type of crab that live right in the anemone as well. They don't get stung, just like the clownfish do. And they're super cool because you can see the guy on throwing his feelers out there. They're actually filter feeders. So they'll use those appendages and scoop things out of the water and put those in their mouth. And they'll eat all sorts of small little things that are coming into the water column. But if they want to, they can also use those claws and grab small little food items as well. So we have two of them here in that tank, and they always, if you guys come back and visit us at the zoo, they're almost always in the bottom left-hand corner, hanging out in that little group of anemones. It's their favorite spot. And then the last animal that we have in this tank, we have actually about 8 of them in here, but they're very small and they're hard to see sometimes. It's right in that back behind the anemones. I don't know if you guys can see that little guy right back there. He's kind of red and white. And that is a sexy anemone shrimp. So those are small little shrimp species that live amongst the anemones as well. There we go, nice good view on them. And they also do not get stung. They have that nice coating so that they can swim in and around them and walk amongst the anemones, and they'll use their little claws and pick things up off of the rocks and not get stung, which is super cool. So those are our 3 species that live amongst the anemones with our 2 anemones. So going back to the clownfish real quick, I just want to tell you guys some fun facts about clownfish. So, one of the cool things about clownfish is the larger, more aggressive fish in the group is always the female. So the big girl right in the middle right there who's swimming around, she's the dominant fish in this tank, and she is the big female. If she were to pass away, or if any clownfish were to pass away in the ocean, the next largest and most dominant male would turn into a female, and then he would bond and mate with the one that was right below him. So these guys are actually able to go from being a boy to a girl. So all clownfish are born as boys. Yep, they're all born as boys. And then if they grow up to be the bigger, more aggressive one, once the biggest one dies, they can become a female and lay eggs and do all that stuff that the female fish do. So they're super, super cool as well.
All right, we've got some questions rolling in.
Awesome.
So let's see. What are they? I just joined. You have a few people that have asked that. So again, these are
2-banded clownfish. So they're different from the typical common clownfish, or the ones that you guys associate with Finding Nemo. They're actually pretty easy to tell apart. They have the 2 white stripes as opposed to all those other white stripes that the common clownfish has, the Nemo fish.
So Logan, age 8, wants to know, what are their predators?
So clownfish will be eaten by, are you talking about the clownfish or the anemones? We'll go through
I think
both.
the clownfish.
The clownfish, okay. The clownfish will be eaten by larger fish and sometimes larger crabs and things like that. They're all pretty small, and they can make a nice little snack for a bigger fish. That's why it's important for them to hide in those anemones to try to stay safe.
And Melody is asking, are there multiple bonded pairs in the tank or in their wild communities?
In the wild communities, the larger dominant female is always the one that's going to be breeding, and she's going to hold that out. In this tank, these types of clownfish, the 2-bandeds, especially this pair, they tend to be a little more aggressive, so they don't let anybody else bond or mate or pair. They only actually share the tank with 1 other small male, and that's all we have in here, so not really.
And where are these guys found in the wild?
So in the wild, these guys are found all throughout the Indo-Pacific area. So once again, that's that Great Barrier Reef. We're getting into Hawaii, you're getting into Indonesia, into the Indian Ocean and stuff like that. So clownfish have a pretty wide range.
And are they just found with the anemones?
So they can live without anemones. We actually have some in our coral tank next door that live without the anemone, and they're perfectly fine. And depending if you get a certain kind in a fish tank, sometimes they don't even know how to bond to the anemone, so they don't do that. But these guys are usually found associated with anemones.
And are they found in the same places as the other types of clownfish?
Yeah, so pretty much all clownfish come from the Indo-Pacific area, and they all sort of overlap. There may be some that are very localized and specific to certain areas, but they're all going to be in that general range. If you guys want, once we're done with the chat, we'll go over, and there's actually a map. We'll show you that graphic so you can guys get a good idea of where they actually live.
And Annie, age 8, and Harper, age 6, want to know, what do the clownfish eat?
So clownfish, if you guys can see, I don't know how well you can see, but they actually have pretty nasty looking little teeth. And they'll eat pretty much anything that's smaller than them. So they'll eat a lot of small crustaceans, so like little crabs, little shrimps, small fish, little worms, pretty much anything. They're pretty mean little predators, to be honest. The little Finding Nemo where they looked all cute and cuddly isn't quite as true as we would like to think.
All right, and can you tell me a little bit more about the anemones?
Of course, yeah. So the cool thing about the anemones are in a similar group as, think of them as a jellyfish that's stuck to a rock, actually. So they will sting, and they'll get food like that. So as they're moving around, or as food moves around them, they'll sting those food items and bring them into that central disc where their mouth is. They can also photosynthesize just like corals. So they have a relationship with an algae that lives in their cells, and that's why you see a lot of them associated with the light up top. And they can use that light, well, the algae inside them uses that light to make energy and food for the anemone. And there's tons and tons of different species of anemones all over the world. We actually have some local cold water anemones as well here at the zoo. So this tank is 78 degrees right now, and our cold water anemones that we have are in 58 degree water, which is a 20 degree swing, which is pretty big for ocean life. So anemones are found everywhere all over the world.
And why do they call them bubbletip anemones?
So if you can see some of the guys in the back, if you look at the tips of their tentacles, they're blown up like a balloon, like a bubble. So that's why they call them bubbletip anemones.
Is that as big as they get?
So these guys will get about 1 foot almost across, give or take. Like a big one would be almost a foot across. So some of the bigger ones that are in this tank, it's hard to obviously tell individuals apart. But some of the bigger ones are pretty darn big. Like if you look at this guy right here, he's about that wide across. That's one individual right there. So that's a decent sized one right there. And then there's some other bigger ones that are back in here. This guy's not a bad size. This one's pretty big as well too.
And how do they move? Because I didn't realize that anemones actually move.
What I'll do for you guys right now is I'm actually going to feed, not the clownfish, but I'm going to feed the anemones. So you're actually going to be able to see them eating, moving, closing, and things like that. So I can actually prove to you and show you that they are animals. So we'll start with the ones that are right up front, obvious. So all you have to do is give them the food. They'll sting the food item. Kind of see it getting stuck to their tentacles. And then they're going to slowly pull that into their mouth area. So if you guys keep firing away at the questions while I'm feeding, I'm more than happy to answer them.
So there was a question from Gabby about the clownfish.
Okay.
Asking, do they go in schools?
They will sit in small groups. They're not going to be sitting in those giant schools like you guys think of with herring, if you guys have been to a herring run if you live around here, or salmon or things like that. But they will hang out in smaller groups. It really depends on the species of clownfish. There are a lot of different types of clownfish out there as to what size group they prefer to associate with.
And if you are watching this, you can see the piece of food that Kyle put in is like, it's pretty much disappearing now.
So what they'll do is they sting it with those tentacles. You can see them kind of closing, like if you were to close your hands. And they're bringing it towards that central disc in the mouth, like I was telling you guys about. The small one right here might show you guys a little bit better. The small ones are usually pretty quick to eat.
Let's see if we can get a good look on that.
So like I said before, these anemones, they don't really have to eat. They can get their energy from the light, but we do like to feed them. It's a way to make them grow nice and big and strong, and they would be eating small things in the wild anyway, so why not?
And so you can see this one it's filling up its tentacles.
Yep, the tentacles are going to be pulling in that center part, and then if you look kind of off to the side, that whole back part right here, that's where all the organs are going to be, and that's where it's bringing the food into so it can digest it. And they do have kind of like a foot, if you can see on this guy. So that's how they attach the rock right there where I'm pointing. And some of them can be very, very, very long, like this one right here. The foot starts back here and comes all the way up to this animal right here. So I mean, if you look at it, that's a...
Wow. Lee wants to know, what are you feeding the anemones?
Fish. So I'm actually giving them the same fish that we give our seals. I just chop it up, obviously, into much smaller pieces than the seals want. And I'll just hand it right to them. I usually do it either with tongs, because you guys got to remember these guys do sting, so you definitely have to be careful. Luckily, ours here don't sting super bad, but I have worked on one tank where if you don't pay attention, it looks like you got burned. It's all sort of burn marks all along you. So. And
that was a question actually that Beth had. Can they sting humans?
Yes. So, like I said, our guys aren't too bad. But they will sting. If I were to stick my hand in here and keep doing it over and over and over again and touching them, I do get kind of itchy. It hurts after a while. But some people who are allergic to them can definitely have a huge reaction right away. And then there are some species that will put a good lick on you.
All right, I'm actually zoomed in on one anemone that you just gave a piece to, and you can see all the tentacles closing in.
Yep, so these guys are animals. Like I said, they do react to the food that they get. They sting it. They don't know that it's, you know, already a dead piece of fish, so they're stinging it. They're doing everything that they normally would. This one right here, you can actually see him. He's already sucking that piece right in.
Oh, yeah.
Right there.
So the tentacles have all
Sunk right in. They have a mouth that's dead center. The carpet actually does a pretty good job of doing that. Actually feed the carpet right now. Way down at the bottom. And you'll see him. That sticks right away. And he'll pull up into a tiny little ball.
Oh.
Assuming the clownfish don't take it, which they do sometimes. They're a little bold.
Unfortunately, this one we can't really
Get a good angle on.
No, it's not one we can get a good angle on, but
It's all right.
this
These guys are all
one's-
doing great.
So Annie and Harper wanted to know, do clownfish come in different colors?
Yes. So there's a lot of different types of clownfish out there. Clownfish is like me saying dog. Well, what kind of dog are you talking about? Are you talking about a Chihuahua? Are you talking about a Great Dane? Are you talking about a Pitty? Are you talking about German Shepherd? There's tons and tons of different types of clownfish out there. And then also, because clownfish breed really well in fish tanks, people have been doing all sorts of different types of clownfish. So you can actually get the Nemo fish all white. You can get them all black. You can get them orange with cow spots. You can get them white with cow spots. They do all sorts of crazy stuff. with
So that was a question as well. Do they come in different colors?
Yeah, they come in different colors, different shapes, different sizes. The same type of clownfish can even come in different colors, shapes, and sizes as well, depending on who you know and how much you want to do with it.
And another question was, do captive clownfish or captive bred clownfish know how to interact with anemones?
That is a phenomenal question. So it's debatable. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's actually kind of thought after a few generations. So the great-great-great-grandparents may come from the ocean, and they're doing perfectly fine. But then after a while, if you don't introduce them to the anemones or they don't interact with anemones very often, they can actually not host. And then the anemones will eat them because the anemones don't know the difference. So yes and no. It depends on what species of clownfish, how long they've been in the tank for, who their parents were they introduced to anemones when they were younger, things like that.
So Hannah, age 8, wants to know, is that electricity inside of them? So they're not using electrical currents at all.
No,
They're just...
the electrical currents that they would be, not to get too sciencey, but everybody kind of a little bit of electricity. That's how your muscles move and things like that. But they're not going to be like a electric eel shocking their food. It's similar to a jellyfish where they actually have each one of these little tentacles has harpoons on them, for lack of a better term, and that's what is coming out and stinging people. So if you see kind of on my finger, see how it's kind of sticking to my finger? I'm using my nail because it doesn't sting through the nail, but it's actually harpooned into my nail and it's attempting to sting and eat my nail. That's why it's sticking to me.
What type of a mouth do the anemones have? Do they have teeth? They're pulling that food in using the tentacles.
So mouth is just a term I'm using for you guys to understand. It's actually more of a oral opening. So when I say mouth, I mean more of like a hole where they pull it into. Because it's the same in and out for these guys. It's just one in, one out.
Okay. And there was a question before, I'm going to scoot back over to them, on the porcelain anemone crabs.
Yeah, that's actually about to give them something anyway.
What are their predators?
Again, any fish that's going to be able to reach down and grab them is going to eat them. Bigger crabs are going to eat them. Anything that could swallow them would definitely take those guys. As you can see, they're not shy about taking a big piece of fish too. So,
Will the anemones try and take it? Or...
the fish away from them?
Yeah.
If the anemones sting it, it's going to become a tug of war to see who can pull it in first. The anemones always win in the end, though. So the crab will take as much as he wants off of it, and then the anemones will eat it from there.
So here's a great question from Beth. When a male becomes a female, is that forever, or can it change back if other girls become part of the group?
Forever. So another girl can't really become part of the group, because the only way to become a girl is to be the strongest, most dominant member of your group. So it doesn't, and then you only stop becoming a dominant, strong member when you die.
Okay.
So.
So they can't go from male to female and then back to male.
No. So it's actually it's not instantaneous either. It takes some time for them to become female. They have to change all of their organs inside, everything. A lot of stuff has to change. So once you do that and you're invested and you turn into a female, that's it.
Okay. And here's a great question from Cindy. How far do anemones walk in a day?
How far do they walk in a day?
Yeah, so I know I've come in the afternoon and looked at the tank, and then come in the next day, and the anemones have moved all around.
So anemones will really move. They're only going to move if the current or the light or something is not advantageous anymore. So they're able to move pretty darn far, especially the carpet. Like if he was in a bigger tank, he'd scoot all over the place. But they're not going to move if they don't have to. So to answer your question, I don't know how far they could go, but they don't tend to move too far.
And you can see, I'm going to look back at the carpet. So at the beginning of the talk, when we panned in on this carpet anemone, it was sort of all spread out. Mm-hmm. And during the course of just us having this keeper chat, you can see how it's moved and kind of curled in on itself.
So you can actually see it wrapping up on that piece of food.
Yep.
And how sticky that is. That's it stinging right there.
And then it just
pulls it right to the middle.
Pulls it right in, right to the middle. That is so cool. Who knew that anemones could be so
voracious little predators?
Yeah. I did not know that.
This is actually not even as bad. When I feed the cold water anemones, I honestly believe that they're even worse than these guys. Well, not worse, but they're definitely way more eager to eat than these guys, because the cold water anemones live in deeper, colder water, so they don't see the light as often. They don't get that photosynthetic benefit that these guys do. They're not getting energy from the sun, so they will eat massive things, and they will just swallow it in 2 seconds, which is really cool to see, especially since they're right here in our waters. And a lot of people don't associate anemones with cold water, but they're there. They're underneath ice in the polar ice caps. They're in deep water. They're at the bottom of the ocean where nobody can see them. They're all over the place.
And a shout out to Bobby, who donated. For those of you that do not know, there is a donate button. Your donation goes to the Zoological Society. That helps us underwrite all our education programs and special events, and helps support the zoo and help us further our mission, our conservation initiatives. So we thank you for donating.
Thank you very much.
One of the reasons we're able to do these kind of cool virtual keeper chats with you.
I'll give you guys
I'm actually learning a lot. I did not know.
We'll give one to this guy right here. You guys should be able to see him.
Did not know all this.
So I've actually fed out 5 fish to this whole tank.
Wow.
And they would still eat more. But you don't want to feed them too much, obviously. Get this guy over here.
Let's see if we have any more. Do all anemones sting? Hannah, age 8, wanted to know.
Yes. So if you guys tuned into my jellyfish chat a few weeks ago, think of it the same way you think about jellyfish. All anemones sting, it just the severity of the sting is what changes. So some don't hurt that much. Some you're gonna really regret touching them. It really depends, but they all do sting. They're using these tentacles, like I said, right here. Mm-hmm. And as you can see, they're like, it's sticking to my finger right now. So if I was a fish, that'd be stinging me, that'd be hurting me, and then I would get pulled right into the middle, right where the mouth is right there, and then it would start eating me. But I'm too big.
I actually am zoomed in on one that you just fed, and you can tell it's a piece of a fish.
Yep,
like the
sorry
head.
for the fish head, guys, if it's too graphic for anybody.
Hi, Bev. Bev is tuning in from Ontario, Canada, which
Hello.
is awesome. Diana's saying very pretty. They are very delicate looking, even though...
And they are easily breakable. They will die very easily. They are pretty delicate, but they're tough as nails when it comes to survival too, though.
How do these guys reproduce? How do you get more anemones?
There's two ways that they can reproduce. They can reproduce the conventional way, where they just inject the material into the water and make more like that. They can also do another process called budding, which, again, I keep referring back to our local tank with our local anemones. You actually see little buds all over the place, where all of a sudden next to an anemone, you'll see a teeny tiny duplicate. So basically they're cloning themselves and little pieces are popping off and they're making more like that. So you could actually do a tank with this many anemones if you started with 3 or 4, and they would just bud. If you had the right conditions and they were happy, they would just start budding like crazy and make more anemones.
I'm going to pull back a little because it looks kind of cool now. You can see where they've pulled in all their tentacles. They almost look like
Like a
they
ball.
look round. Yeah, it almost looks like an onion.
Yep. So this guy's definitely doing it really
yeah,
well here.
and this guy up in the middle here. Question was asked: what are threats to these guys in the wild? To everything in the tank, the anemones, the clownfish.
So definitely, there's a couple threats. Global warming is definitely one, where the oceans are changing, they're getting warmer. It's changing the environment for these guys. I know you guys think warm water, they must be happy, things like that. But there is a range where it's too warm and they can't survive. Or the algae that lives inside of them can't survive, which is also a huge problem for these guys. Over collection for the pet trade is huge with any of these species that are in fish tanks. So I know I said that clownfish are easy to breed and anemones are easy to breed, but there are still people that go out there and collect them from the wild, which is not a bad thing, but you just have to be hyper aware and very critical and careful about who you guys get your marine aquatic animals from. Make sure that they are getting them the right way, sustainably, making sure that they're not just going to one spot over and over and over again and over harvesting. That's definitely one of the big concerns that a lot of people don't think about.
And I can speak to that a little bit because where we get our fish and our anemones from, it's a very rigorous process to make sure that if they're collected from the wild, they're done in a way that's sustainable and not injurious to the ecosystem.
So all the fish and marine invertebrates and everything that we get for our fish tanks here at the zoo, if they were not bred in a facility like that was said, there's a lot of other companies that are super duper careful about the way they do it, and we only get it from them because we want to be good stewards of the ocean and the world as well. So
you get a lot of shout outs. Kyle Katie says hi. Katie Morrell.
Hi guys.
And there's a close up of our clownfish.
Yep, so that's our bonded pair, and I don't know if they still have it. If you guys look underneath there, I don't know how well it's going to show up. They actually do have some eggs right underneath where they're sitting. It may not show up really, really well on the camera.
Well, you can, if
Kinda.
if he moves, looks like he's guarding it a little bit, but
so
it looks
the
kind of
parents
like,
will
there we
actually-
go.
The parents will guard the eggs. They'll fan the eggs. They'll make sure that they have air. I've actually seen these guys come in, and they've had fights with worms that we have in the tank to clean up, and they'll have stingers in their mouths, which is okay because they get rid of them real quick. But they will defend the heck out of their eggs, which is really, really cool to see. A lot of people just think fish parents will lay eggs and run away from them. These guys will guard them very, very aggressively. I mean, to the point where they'll go after me if I go too close.
So these guys are still chowing down on the piece of fish, the crabs. Melissa wants to know how many lay at one time.
Again, it depends on the species of clownfish or anemone fish, however you want to call them. So I think these guys will do a couple hundred, give or take. Not all those babies are going to survive, obviously. That's one of the only things Finding Nemo really, really got right, was that mom had hundreds of eggs and one survived. That's pretty accurate.
So Carrie is saying, would you consider these guys extreme parents? The theme of this week's Zoo Crow virtual spring zoo crew that's going on is about extreme animals.
If you consider turning from a boy to a girl extreme, yeah, I would definitely call these guys extreme. We're pretty mundane compared to them, without a doubt. So yeah, if you guys want to know more about that kind of stuff, the zoo crew that we're doing this week is definitely a place to learn a lot more than what I've been telling you.
Here's a question from Kylie, wants to know, how do fish breathe?
Breathe?
Yeah.
So fish have gills, which are very, very different from our lungs. So how to put this really easily. A fish will open its mouth, suck water in through its mouth, and then when it closes its mouth, the action of closing its mouth pushes the water over its gills, and then those gills, they're not breathing water, but they're able to take the oxygen out of the water, and that's how they breathe. So they use the gills, and they do something called buccal pumping, like you can see them doing right now. Open the mouth, close the mouth, gill opens, water passes over the gill. Now, not all fish can do this. There's some fish that, like great white shark, everybody always says, oh, if they stop swimming, they die. That's true, because their action of swimming is what pushes the water over their gills. Not all sharks, but those guys have to swim all the time to breathe.
All right, so Carrie, just I'm going to mention this. So for our virtual zoo crew this week, you can get the activities. She's posted the link, bpzoo.org /virtual-spring-zoo-crew. So if folks are looking, and yep, Diana, that is a crab. These are
Porcelain anemone crabs.
okay.
They're filter feeders slash scavengers slash little carnivores. That one you can see he's actually filter feeding. He's got those kind of like, looks like a feather duster pulling out. He's pulling food in, and then the one behind him is still going to town on that piece of fish. Though he may have lost the anemone. The anemones are swollen
Starting
out.
to pull it in.
Yep. I mean, like I said, the crabs will rip little pieces off.
And then this little, looks like a little black and white
The little red and white guy, that's a sexy anemone
shrimp.
They got that name because they do a fun little dance for each other. We have about 9 of them in this tank, but you only ever see 2 or 3 at a time.
And then for those of you that are joining us late, these are our 2-banded clownfish. And the carpet anemone has done a good job of closing in on itself. And then we've got our bubbletip anemones. So I think we've gone through all of the questions. I'm just scrolling back through to see if I've missed any. We talked about how anemones reproduce. Lots of thank yous for showing these guys. I know I've learned a lot today. So I think that we have answered all the questions.
Awesome.
And it looks like these anemones, are the shrimp edible? Hannah, age 8, wants to know. These are really tiny.
The shrimp are edible if you were a smaller fish that was willing to go after them. Not worth our time to eat though.
Yeah, they're so tiny.
They're super, I mean, you're looking at like grain of rice, a little bit bigger than a grain of rice.
All right, so I'm just gonna pan out so you can kind of, I'm gonna try and do this without flipping the camera. See if we can get everybody all at once. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. These are always fun to do.
We are doing this every day at 11. It changes from day to day depending on what's going on. We miss our visitors. We're so happy that we can continue to bring you guys snapshots of what's going on here at the zoo. We're still here even though we're closed, taking care of these critters. I want to thank Kyle, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.